All right. Well, hey, everybody. We are back with our viewer questions from every state. I'm here with Kalisto, a viewer from out in Washington State. And you are also going to mortuary school, right?
Yeah.
Going into the business. You're involved in a lot of different areas. You'll see Kalisto commenting a lot on lives and giving a lot of good input, a lot of really informative comments that you give. You're not just a basic commenter, you really get into it. So I love that. I always like to see what you're going to say. Now, somebody had asked for random funeral tips or history from every state. So in Washington, things that popped up when I was kind of looking around was just some of the people buried there. And one person who, this one just tipped me because I loved watching the movie back in the day, was that Bruce Lee and Brandon Lee, his son, that died both kind of on movie sets and mysteriously, are buried out in Seattle, Washington. So that was the fun thing that popped up that I found. So if I find it fun, I guess that's what I'm sharing. So, but back when I was in high school, that was the big thing, because the Brandon Lee life story movie kind of thing came out, and then, the Bruce Lee life story, and then Brandon Lee died when he was making, or he had made The Crow, and then he died, whatever the story was. But yeah, that's part of my youth, I guess. So, well, why don't we get rolling? What is your first question for me?
The first question that I have here is that some schools are adding bachelor's degrees to mortuary school programs. Lake Washington Tech is one of them. Several of the classes in these programs reference the future of funeral service and implementing technology. When reviewing the curriculum there, I wanted to know, how do students today, utilizing technical skills like production of podcasts, video editing, and social media management, how do they plan on implementing that in future careers in the funeral service industry, and how would that look?
It's a long question, so I forget half of it by the time you got to the end. But I think one of the things, like when I go to mortuary schools and speak, I talk about the fact that there's things that we do every day that are just ingrained in us, but we don't even see those as being skills that students list on resumes and that they talk to employers about. And so I always ask the question, how many of you post 5 times a week on a social media platform, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever? And almost every person's raising their hands because everybody is so ingrained posting. But there are so many funeral homes, funeral industries or funeral, businesses that don't have social media platforms set up to connect with this next generation of clients. We are now burying, that baby boomer generation, and some of their kids are 30 years old if they had them later in life, or 20 years old if they had them much later in life. So we're into that social media usage zone, and we have to have businesses that reflect that. And we're seeing it even right now during COVID, where everything's online. Everything is, meetings are online, videos are online, funerals are online, and such. And so using the skills we already have ingrained in us and diving deeper into those, and then promoting ourselves going into the business. So when students are going to funeral homes and promoting that about themselves is so key. And I think that down the road, we're going to even be more, talking about holographic viewings where we create a full 3D imaging of the individual that had died because maybe they're not viewable anymore. Heck, what was Michael Jackson had a full holographic tour or something, I don't know, you could go to. So I think we can't even project what technology is going to look like within the business in 5 to 10 years. So all we can do is keep getting new skills, I think, as individuals just in general. And then within the funeral business, it's just going to continue to grow. But we have to market that part of ourselves and not let it just be something we think is our hobby we do, because it can make or break within the funeral business when people are looking for funeral homes, when people are connecting with funeral homes, and how we connect with the community. It's so essential. And there's a lot of that older generation that doesn't quite know how to do that at all. So that's why this newer generation is, it's a clincher right there to get you in the door. to have that knowledge. So
it's that same situation with business law, where it's like, why are we learning business law? So that we can support
right.
ourselves, versus trying to pay a bunch to contract out that lawyer. If we know how to provide these skills ourselves directly in the funeral home, then you don't necessarily have to reach out to these up and coming memorial businesses, so that you can be like,
Right.
utilizing what I already have here.
Well, and that's what the thing is. Some businesses, rather than, if they don't have the skill and they think it's overwhelming to learn it, then they're going to skip over it. If they don't see the value in it, they're not going to pay for it. And if they don't want to take on learning it, they just skip over it. And it can be a very vital part, and it's going to become an even bigger vital part of just business in general. Facebook is for the older generation now. Instagram's for the younger, and everything else that's coming along. So Facebook really is a marketplace for that 50 and older generation to promote your business, to stay in touch, to, have all these connectable moments, especially when people are scared to go into a funeral home. It gives you a little bit safer zone to connect with the funeral home in that online platform as well. So I'm big on people being on social media when it comes to those businesses.
My second
Number
question:
2.
you have really served as an advocate for finding resources for folks entering this industry from all walks of life. That's cultural, religious, disabled, trans, and gender nonconforming. What would you advise someone who is interested in funeral directing, in particular removal and transport, to do if they needed to get a driver's license later in life, or they just got their license and want a job in the funeral home where this skill is critical?
I'm somebody who I've never understood why people don't get their licenses, but I understand people lose them. I know that my husband encounters individuals a lot who, for his business, that they don't have a valid driver's license. They've gotten a DUI. They have, too many accidents. So the company insurance will not cover them. You can work in these positions, but you're always going to have to be matched up with somebody that's doing the physical driving, which means you're not worth as much, unfortunately, as an employee, because they always have to pay someone else to be with you. So it is really critical to have, that accessibility to check all the boxes on that employment skill level. It's not that it's not possible. There just may be ways around it. That's my friend Tyler, we've done a video, and he's in a wheelchair and he's working at a funeral home now. And, his dream never is stopping. He's looking at how do we get a hearse that I can put my wheelchair in and on top of, or, how can I make these things work for me? And how can I do them? Because he's not taking no, it's not possible as an answer. I just love that guy. He's just such a dreamer. So I think that, it definitely is something that can maybe hinder. It might affect your pay level. It might affect everything you're able to do, but it definitely is something. Get it. Like, why not just get it if you can get it? And I understand if there's DUIs, insurance, and things like that, maybe you have to drive your own car. Hey, I'll meet you at the removal. I'll leave at the same time as somebody that else is going, and I can meet you there, or I'll drive my own car in the procession, or, just there are some little ways, but communication with the employer is such a huge part of it, because if they don't understand the issue, or you don't understand why they're paying you less, and, you need to understand, I think they need to understand your side, you need to understand their side, and really having communication about it, because otherwise that's where you get into they're paying me less just because I'm a girl, or because they don't like me, or because of this, or because of that, instead of actually knowing reason. I'm all about know the facts, and not assuming somebody doesn't like me because they think this or they think that. Well, do you know that? Did they really say to your face that? Or are you just assuming that because you want there to be a reason? Maybe you're just messed up, and maybe they're upset because you messed up, and it's not just because you're I don't even know, you're a short, dark-haired girl like me that messed up. It's get to the root, get to the reasoning, know where everything lays on the table, and then go from there. I think it's the best. And sometimes you are the reason, you're the reason, unfortunately, for the choices. And, like we had, I don't know if you heard that interview with Kari, and he had gone to an interview and he didn't get the job. And bless his heart, he called him and said, why? And they said, you had long hair. They didn't like that. It was part of their dress code. That's their business. It's their right. But everybody was like, well, that's not fair and that's not whatever. And Corey's like, yeah, I don't like it, but it's okay. That's maybe not the right place. And that's the thing, is every person's not going to fit in everywhere. It's, there's people I've had to work alongside and I'm like, yeah, no, this is not good. And I can get along with people, but it doesn't make it a good workplace if it's not the right fit for you and you're not wanted because of who you are in your entirety. Even if you're a rock star funeral director, it doesn't mean you're meant to work at every place. So I just totally rambled, answered there for you. Sorry.
Oh, it was completely valid, since I asked the question after seeing Tyler ask about accessible hearse. And I asked because I had my license at 19. I have no priors. I have a perfect driving record, but I lived in walking distance from the university, and at 21, I just didn't renew it. And then after that, I had a bit of driving anxiety, and now it's like, now's the time to get back in. But
right.
When it comes to being honest, they'll throw a question at you like, when did you last lose somebody close to you? And if you go 3 to 4 months ago, that can be a flag where they're like, hey, take some more time and then come back to us after you've had a bit more time to grieve. I want to be honest with them and say, hey, I have a valid driver's license, but this is when I got it.
Right. Well, and you can explain. I think the nice thing is that, those things aren't like on paper before you come in to sit down. So it's verbally explained. You can talk through some things where maybe like a gap in your work history, they may be like, oh, I don't know, even though there may be perfect explanation. Like for a woman, maybe she stayed home and had, raised her child for the first 2 years before taking him off to daycare. And that's why there's 2 years empty. And, it's kind of hard to explain some of that. So some people feel like they almost have to put things on paper or put things in resumes or cover letters because they're worried what may come up. But when you're sitting down talking, you can easily, hey, I didn't need it and just never followed through with getting it, but I know it's vital and I've gotten my new license and here it is. So next question, kind of thing.
Speaking of next question, in most states, or at least here in Washington, I've learned that sometimes an internship will be unpaid as part of the program because in order to have the internship as part of the school program, it has to be unpaid. What are some ways to supplement that income in the industry while still going to school full time?
So I don't believe in working for no pay. Like in our 5th quarter, we had to do a practicum. So it was like 3-4 weeks. It was only like 7-8 hours a week that we went and worked at a funeral home. So it wasn't like a huge time commitment. So it wasn't that big of a deal it was time I would have been in a seated class. I just happened to be at a funeral home during those hours or whatever it was. So to me, it was not like working for free. Your apprenticeship, you should never do that unpaid. There are people who do that, and I don't understand why. There's funeral homes believe they shouldn't have to pay for that. You can't expect somebody to work 50, 60 hours a week, be on call, and not be able to support a family. Like that is a lot of free labor that people are just giving up to funeral homes. That should never be happening. And if you put yourself in that position, shame on you, because that is not okay. You can't work for free. And there are some state laws that say like this isn't volunteer hours. These are clocked labor hours Like there's labor laws, there's all this stuff that protects employees. So you can't supplement. It's hard enough working full time and going to school full time. Some of these programs are so rigorous, trying to work full time is like overwhelming. So if you try and work without being paid, plus work a job to make income, plus go to school online, there is literally, you're at a deficit of hours for the day, and that doesn't involve sleep or eat. And so that's like not an option. What is this, the practicum like they're doing through the school? I mean, it can't be part of your apprenticeship.
Right. The way that you worded it put it in a lot more perspective for me, because I was talking to two different friends, and one was like, well, they were like unpaid internship. And I was like, that doesn't sound right. It sounds like the situation where it's like you accepted the internship and you accepted the no pay without trying to see what the policy looks like. But if
Right.
it's, I went to the funeral home for 8 hours on a Saturday and helped them with the service and helped them move the flowers and help them do the interment, and it was basically volunteering. I don't see
Mm-hmm.
a problem with that, but definitely, I'm like, if I'm going to school for 12 credits, putting in
Right.
28 hours at school and 32 to 40 hours a week at the funeral home, it should be paid with benefits instead of being like, that's
Correct.
illegal to have an internship without benefits, and then balance it, because it's like,
Right.
I'm working this much to get my boards and then this much to make my family keep a roof over our head.
Right. Well, and you need to look in legalities also, because you have to be clocked as an employee. Otherwise, you're like off the books. If you're off the books, and you're a ginormous liability, especially in the funeral business, because if you're handling the casket, handling the remains, driving their vehicles, like, and something happens, how are they covering their butts? Because if you're not a legal employee of the company and they're getting sued for your work because you dropped a body or you did something, then how is that? Like, there's all sorts of logistical legal things right there that are not going to work out good in anybody's favor. So, but like you said, like if you accept the position and accept not being paid, then you're just devaluing yourself. You're putting no value on yourself. And if you've only gone to 2 places and that's the first place that offered you something and they offered you no pay, then say no thank you and move on. Like, sure, maybe work a Saturday just to get a little experience, or go shadow for 2-3 days and see what it's about. But do not work someplace long term for no pay, unless it's part of your school requirement that you have to do so many practicum hours or something like that. That's one thing. Or if you're working for housing while you're in school, I know some places do that, hey, you need to work this many hours of visitation while you're living here, or you need to be on call 2 nights a week, or, in exchange of housing for some work within the funeral home while you're in school, which is kind of benefits both sides there. But yeah, that's a bad situation.
I think this is my third question, but I have 2 supplemental ones if we have time.
All right, let's see what we got time for.
What does licensing in multiple states look like, and how would one obtain a license in more than one state?
So you get licensed in one state and then you reciprocate your license to another. So if you know you're going to be licensed in 2, always go for the higher first and meet those requirements, because it'll be much easier to reciprocate to the other. But let's say, like, I believe Ohio, they require a bachelor's degree. Like, you can't get your mortuary science license without a bachelor's degree. So if you get licensed somewhere else and you want to move to Ohio, you're going to have to, and you only have an associate, you're going to have to go back to school before you can even get the degree or to get the license. So if you think you're ever going to work in a state that requires a bachelor's, get a bachelor's, especially like mortuary schools. Like, I went to Cincinnati, 4 quarters you get an associate's, 5 quarters you get your bachelor's. Like, it's pretty no brainer if you think you're going to need it ever. I mean, I had a bachelor's before I went, so I didn't really need it, but I figured, why not have 2 bachelors? Like, so Then reciprocating over, it depends how many years you've been licensed in whatever state you were in. It depends what their state boards look like, what they require for the national boards. So you may just have to sit and take their state board and then get a new license. Some states you may have to take, if let's say you've done your apprenticeship and then you decide you want to move to another state, you might have to repeat your apprenticeship in a different state because that might not transfer. But if you're already licensed, you might just, the most part, if you have the associates or bachelors, whichever they require, you may just have to sit for a new state board to get it.
It makes sense. It came into mind since if you live on like the Illinois-Wisconsin border and you're like, I live in Illinois, I have my license in Illinois, you can drive into Wisconsin. Just like with Washington and Oregon being right next to each other, where you could go to Oregon, Washington, Idaho or something. So.
Right. Well, that's a lot of Michigan directors that live down on the border of Indiana will have their Indiana license as well, because in Michigan, you don't have to have a license in order to receive somebody like from a hospital or anywhere. You don't have to sign anything with a license number. But Indiana was a state that you did have to do that with. And so to go down, just drive over across the border 2 minutes to go to a hospital, you had to have an Indiana license in order to sign out a deceased from the hospital. And so you needed your license to receive anybody. So a lot of people down, on a border, you're going to want to have both.
Yesterday I was in a talk about estate planning and funerals, and it was with one of my close friends who does rural advocacy here in Washington, and we're both from the trans community, and it came up, since I'm big on green burials coming from a family of nursery owners, is that in some green burial cemeteries, namely the one that networks with the funeral home co-op here in Washington, that unnatural effects cannot be buried with that body. That would include like a titanium wedding ring, and it would be a concern for in specific trans community members that are not cremated, that have titanium body parts, and that could also apply for somebody with a titanium rod in their leg. Mm-hmm. Also, how would this look if they want a green burial, and if that person also wants an animal buried with them, and there are parameters around certain burial grounds about what's allowed there and what isn't?
Well, it's really going to depend on the cemetery. There, like in our area, my area, there is not much real true green burial. There's not much parameter that any of that would come in play. So those things, I think, it's very progressive out where you are when it comes to, that's where composting is kind of gearing up to get going. And, those areas have so much more forward moving action in terms of different type of disposition, that there are much more strict rules in place and things that they're thinking about and kind of all of that. So it's not an area I work in, like I don't encounter that like literally ever. It would just be more industry talk that I've been part of, not boots on the ground actually encountering it. So it's, if there's a requirement of the cemetery, that's the requirement. Just like last year, New York made it legal that you could bury animals with a human in a cemetery. So you just have to follow the rules of whatever cemetery you're in. Unfortunately, it may not work for you. So look for a different green cemetery that may not have a strict, rigid things in place for that burial. It's one of those, well, that doesn't seem fair. Well, they have their rules. It is what it is. Move on to somewhere else and stop fighting against a wall that doesn't want you in it, and go to the next, space and kind of see what they say there.
You have several videos about work-life balance as a mother and funeral director. And what tips are out there around, like, is there a written plan on how parents can manage to spend time at home and in the funeral home? And what does mapping out time for travel look like?
It's all dependent on the funeral home you work for. It really is, because you can work for somewhere that has you going out on night calls, embalming in the middle of the night, working all the visitations. It's a much more rigid, not rigid, but it's a much more time consuming role at that funeral home, where you may work at a funeral home that they have removal staff that goes out at night. Like when you leave for the night, you're home for the night. That you're not embalming in the middle of the night. It's just an 8 to 5, 9 to 5 sort of thing. So it really depends on where you work for. So that's why I always say people may start working for a few, and it's affecting their home life. It's affecting, their relationships. Find a different funeral home. It's not the business. It's not the job. It's just the employer is not a right fit for you. So don't let it kill your passion. Move on and find a better location before it kills your passion, because it happens all the time. I've been in positions where I was snow blowing at 5 a.m., going home, getting in my shower, getting back into work, meeting with families, and going out on calls that night, and then embalming in the middle of the night. And there was just no break. I was there on my days off. It was just too much. And at that time I didn't have kids, or else I would have gone just crazy. So you have to just find somewhere that's a really good balance for you and your family. You are going to miss things. It's just something going in, but you figure a way to make it balance out somewhere else. You may miss this sort of event, but if you don't ask the employer, say, hey, this is coming up in a week or two, and planning ahead is crucial as well. Making sure you are being as open with your employer as I've talked about, that my child has this event coming up, or my anniversary with my spouse is coming up. Can I switch around a date? Can I, leave a little early that date? Can I do this? Can I do that? Not being the person who asks all the time for that. But I know I had a boss one time really appreciated when I would just try and switch with another staff member instead of bringing everything to them, saying, hey, me and so-and-so switched next week for our days off because he had something, or I had something, or she had something. We solved the issue, just to let you know we're going to be. They would rather you do that and make it work for you and your staff than bring every single thing to, a manager. So there's a lot of ways around things. There's a lot of ways to make it flow and make it good. But communication is, at the end of the day, with everything, is always the best thing. So yeah.
Glad to hear that's an option, since I've had
Yes.
times where there was that manager that was gone for 2 months, and I shared that with every other person I've worked with. I was like, you're not going to be like that one person who was gone for 2 months.
Yeah.
Where I just felt like putting my feet in there as the role.
Yeah, it gets hard if you don't have leadership and you don't know quite where to sit, and it just doesn't all. There's too much unknown. There needs to be defined roles and no gray area. I hate working in gray areas. Like, I am such a, A, B, C, this is it kind of person. So, well, thank you for your questions. I appreciate them so much. You have such a different vantage point going into the business, and knowing some more pointed questions to ask about it. So thank you.
Of course.
Well, bye, guys.